Is it challenging keeping your adult participants engaged in a workshop? Then let's listen to Dr. Carrie Graham on how the adult learning approach keeps adults engaged, learn more, and have them feel you have crafted a workshop tailored to their needs. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burris, and today we have our guest, Dr. Carrie Graham. Carrie, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Burris. It's nice to be here, and I'm so excited for where our conversation will lead us.
Yes, so you're an expert in adult learning, so please define it for us and tell us what's in it for business.
Yeah, so adult learning is not a well-known field, but the focus is on supporting adults in the ways that they learn. So looking at their levels of motivation, those things that potentially are barriers to their learning, and most importantly, how adults pull from their past experiences to their current learning needs and addressing their learning needs. And so it's a different take on teaching and definitely focuses on facilitation as compared to children, because as we all know, children have minimal life experiences and are they're a blank slate. And so that's the opportunity. The difference is, that adults have these other factors that we're able to draw from that really enriches our learning experience.
So you say adult learning is you evaluate the motivation of the adult, the barriers to learning that they have, and they pull from past experience to give meaning to what they're learning. And they have certain needs and desired outcomes. And therefore, facilitation is better. So maybe define for our listeners the difference between facilitation and teaching.
Yes, I love that question. Oftentimes, when we think about teaching, we think about the person who has the information, and the student or the learner is facing that individual, just like school children. The teacher is in the front and all of the pupils are facing them, absorbing the information. But again, because they are a blank slate. So that's what teaching, in a very basic sense, that's what teaching looks like. When we think about facilitation of learning, and specifically facilitation for adult learners, research has shown, and the theory identifies, that adults learn best and they're able to retain information, pretty significantly when they're engaged in the learning. They're active participants in their own learning. So what a facilitator does, the facilitator guides them, provides them with information as they need it. And that's if they want that additional information. But supporting adults as they are problem solving, engaging in peer conversation to share experience and share solutions to their problems. So that's the big difference, is that as a facilitator, your role really should be to guide the conversation and guide the learning. When you are teaching, you are providing a big introduction to a basic concept. You're scaffolding that learning experience, and you're providing additional prompts to gather that information and learn it.
So according to your opinion, should all adults have facilitation to learn, or can they also be taught?
Yeah, I am a proponent of facilitation. Now, I will say this. Oftentimes when adults are engaged in learning, it is typically in an informal setting. So in the workplace, on their own, in community. Those are great places for facilitation to be used. When an adult steps into a formal learning environment, such as a classroom, someone going back to college to get a degree, that is typically a place where you will often see teaching happening However, I argue that facilitation also has a place in a formal learning environment for adults. And the reason for that is because adults, again, they're pulling from their past experiences and, their past personal experiences, their past life experiences, and you're giving them time and space to reflect on those experiences and draw from that to enrich their current learning experience in the moment, as opposed to teaching the way that it has evolved in the 21st century. There is a lot of one individual holding the knowledge, so to speak, and offering it to the learner.
Yes, you make a very good point that it's giving time and space to draw from their prior experience, giving more meaning. And I think it builds on what they already have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things that I have found, and my entire career has been based on, almost 20 years has been based on teaching, facilitation, professional development, adult learning, all of that. And regardless of the environment, consistently, when I employ facilitation skills, the individuals who are the participants really value that experience. They feel that their voices are heard and the attention is on them. So, the learning becomes student-centered or learner-centered, opposed to speaker, teacher-centered and focused.
So much more attention on the participant
Absolutely.
than teacher. I think that's nice. And of course, that makes them much more engaged because they feel concerned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they're able to, make sense of a new concept through their own lens. And when they're doing that, you're absolutely correct. Their level of engagement significantly increases. And I consistently say that when adults are engaged in a meaningful way, they're going to learn and remember because they're making personal connections to whatever the concept is. And if we remember something, there is a likelihood that we are going to actually apply whatever the information or the skill set is. And so I always, share with my clients, my audiences, that let's focus on the engagement piece. And it goes beyond simply playing games and icebreakers and things like that. It's really an intentional strategy for supporting learning.
Yes, and the facilitation allows communication between participants, and teaching, by teaching what you've learned, is also a way of learning. And then you also you have the learning from different perspectives and different ways of seeing a situation. So totally convinced about adult education system. I wanted to mention strategic design. Can you talk about how do you design something compared to teaching something so that the adults are more engaged and retain more information?
Yeah. So when we look at adult learning theory, there are a few validated and very reliable assumptions about all adult learners. And I won't go into all of them, but I will use one as an illustration. And that is the life experience, that people have rich life experiences. And so when I am working with someone to develop a strategic design for a training, let's say, my focus is always primarily on the attendee. Who are the participants? So let's move beyond their job titles, right? If this is a training for a corporation, let's move beyond their job titles and let's move beyond their education. And let's even move slightly beyond some demographic information. But who are they as individuals? What are their past experiences? What are they bringing to this training? That's where I start. And that's where, I use the language strategic design, because based on whatever is identified about the audience, that's where the building comes from. It shouldn't be primarily content and meeting the objectives, the learning objectives, but rather I share with people, let's focus on the individuals first and then the content. And the way that we support the learner in understanding the content is drawing from who they are and what they bring to the table. So the strategy from a strategic perspective, it's a lot deeper work. It's a lot deeper work. It takes a bit more time than simply saying, let's build this content and teach it, but rather being agile, being flexible in the moment is also a skill set that helps people leverage facilitation skills. And that is all part of the strategy.
So, Carrie, wonderful. So, what to know about the individuals at the facilitation, their education, everything, it requires a lot of research before the facilitation takes place. So, give us some examples of how you get the necessary information before you do a facilitation.
Yeah, it depends. So the level of research really depends on the learning objectives. It depends on the size of the group that's going to be present, and it also depends on how long we'll be engaged in a learning experience. So if this is a once a year training, the investigation of who the people are can be a bit more generalized. And that's where the flexibility of the facilitator really needs to be strong. But if we're thinking about, or if we're going to be working with, say, a group of 5 executives in a 12-month training program, executive leadership training program, there's an opportunity to have them do some assessments prior to, and it's really so that the facilitator has an understanding of who's in the room. And building trust is also a part of that. Now, granted, you can't build trust in an assessment, but there are questions that can be asked when you're face to face or when you're live that will help you glean some background information about the participants.
I found that giving assessments before a facilitation helps because you're telling them something about themselves. First of all, they're interested because you're talking about them and you're giving them insights so that the trust level that you so rightly mentioned is already developed before the facilitation, especially with top executives that are very powerful and I think it's even more important to do this connection before and understanding.
Absolutely. And again, I would argue that we have to be mindful of what is the expected outcome and to what level, to the depth at which we will have conversation. And so it's pretty difficult to have very intimate conversations with a group of 200 individuals in a one-time session. But rather, when people are developing relationships as part of a very small training, again, a 5-person training of executives over the course of a year, it makes it easier to gather information and they're more likely to open up and share some parts, elements of their past experience that can be used in the present learning.
Don't you find that it's this one-to-one before you can really identify their biggest pain point, the biggest challenge they have with the communication, even with other team members, that later on, with this knowledge, you can facilitate it so that it surfaces in a more positive way so that the issue can be addressed.
Absolutely. And Katrina, you said the key word is the facilitation. Because if you are doing the assessment and your focus is on the teaching, there's minimal opportunity for the individual or the individuals to explore, right? Why do I have this pattern of behavior, or why am I consistently getting this particular outcome? So there isn't the time and space. You're not giving them the time and space to be reflective when you're teaching. It's minimal, I should say. But with facilitation, being able to ask very thoughtful questions that encourages the learners to take a deeper dive, to look beyond the superficial answer that they may quickly be willing to provide, but rather to do a critical assessment of themselves.
Yes, I totally agree. You also mentioned that facilitation of adult learning, requires less effort than teaching.
Yes.
Really? I think facilitation requires a lot of observation to know what to do next, but I'm dying to hear your point of view.
Yeah, and it is partly that. So I don't know if others who do a lot of facilitation would agree with me, but my perspective is I taught for 2 decades, but I've facilitated trainings for that same amount of time. And the part about the teaching is your focus is on the content and that the learners understand the content. So for me, I found that it's a lot of revisiting a concept, slowly building and supporting their learning to a more advanced concept and a more advanced concept. I find that there's heavy lifting in that. But when I've worked as a facilitator, I draw on from my listening skills as well as my ability to hear what people are saying, but also what they're not saying, and pose a very thoughtful question that gives them pause, and it encourages them to do a deeper reflection, a deeper dive into their thinking and beliefs. And I have known that that's what I do, but it hasn't been until the last 3 or 4 years that I've had clients and others in industry say that they've recognized that that is a skill set that I bring to the table that they haven't often seen. And it really helps them think deeper about a particular subject. So for me, I'm doing a lot of listening, but I'm asking one particular question, and then I'm done talking, right? And so then, the talking and the exploration is on their part. Whereas when I'm teaching, there's a lot of explanation on my part.
Yes, and of course, the point you made is that there's people that take information in different ways. Facilitation allows people to learn much more in their way of learning, so
Absolutely.
They assimilate more. We're coming to the end of our podcast. Where can people get a hold of you?
Yes, I invite everyone to visit me on drcarriegraham.com, and I'm on LinkedIn. So, I have updated information on a daily basis on LinkedIn, and I'd love to engage with people in conversation if they're interested.
Thank you very much, Carrie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Katrina, for having the time to chat and share more about adult learning from a high-level executive learning position. I appreciate that.
Well, I'm a proponent of adult learning, so that was an easy one. Thank you very much, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burris' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.